Today we are talking about the new Stark Varg EX. This is a new bike coming from Stark Future, and this is kind of an interesting motorcycle. This news came out a couple weeks ago, but we want to talk about it because some of these electric motorcycles, and this one especially, are stepping into the territory of being as good, if not better than, their gas counterparts. And I think that's kind of a new phenomenon.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of these electric bikes coming out. Some of them you see renderings of and you can't really trust that they're going to turn into anything real. But Stark has been making bikes for a couple years now. They launched the motocross version, the Varg MX, in December 2021. Now we have their second bike, which is completely street legal, has everything you need to take it on the road. And there's a lot of excitement around this bike right now.
Yeah, so this is an enduro version of this off-road bike, but like you said, it is street legal, so it's something that you'll be able to put a plate on and actually ride on the street, which means it's more relevant to us because we love dirt bikes, but we're not experts in the dirt bike area. But now that these are stepping into street legal bikes, it's something that's definitely piquing our interest. And before we talk too much about how these bikes stack up against some gas-powered alternatives, let's talk a little bit about the basic specs on these.
Yeah, so it comes in two different variants. You can get either the base model or the more premium one, which they call the Alpha. You're either going to be able to get it in a 60 or an 80 horsepower variant, depending on which one of those you go with. But the cool part is they're all adjustable completely in terms of the power levels, and we'll talk a little bit about the tech and the screen and everything. But there's a lot of customization that you can do in the app, and I believe you can take it all the way down to like 10 horsepower. So infinitely customizable. You can really grow into the power levels as you get more comfortable with the bike.
Yeah, that's a pretty great bit of adjustability, especially when you potentially have a bike putting out in the Alpha version as much as 80 horsepower. A lot of situations, I'm going to wager the majority, maybe 95% of them off-road. Do you really want 80 horsepower? It might be fun for a little bit, but it's probably not strictly necessary. So that adjustability is an advantage of this electric powertrain, which is a pretty cool thing. These bikes, even though they're electric, they're also not insanely heavy. So this version, the EX, weighs 264 pounds. That's only about 4 pounds heavier than the MX version they already came out with, even though this is a bike that you are going to be able to bring on the street. It's got everything that you need to put a plate on it and ride it around on the road. And 264 pounds is not as light as some dirt bikes are, especially some of the smaller displacement two-strokes, but it's pretty much right there in line with a lot of 450s, especially 450 bikes that you can actually register and ride around on the road, ones that have lights and everything that you need to do that. So 264 pounds, not too bad.
Yeah, I think that's an acceptable weight. We've done some, testing with like Honda street legal motocross bike, and they always add more than 4 pounds worth of weight when you go from the motocross version to the street legal version. So pretty impressive that they only added 4 pounds to this bike. Still going to be plenty manageable. Charging rate, 2 hours to charge this up. If you're on a 240 volt charger, it's going to be a little longer, 3.5 hours on 120. And I think a lot of people will end up charging this on 120 in their garages. Up to 6 hours of riding on a full battery, which I think that's plenty for me. A bike like this, you're not going to really be planning cross-country road trips with
Probably
it.
not.
No, it's, ride around the city. If you throw some supermoto tires on it, take it to a trail, you're probably going to be pretty exhausted after 6 hours.
Yeah, and again, that is going to depend very much on what speed you're riding, how you're riding the bike, how aggressively. So apparently, you can run down the battery in just over an hour if you're riding really aggressively, maybe if you were doing a high-speed highway stint, or if you're on something like a motocross track and you're going full pin on the throttle quite a bit. But what I will say about this EX is that they actually improved the battery's capacity compared to the MX. So this is a 7.2 kilowatt hour battery compared to the 6.5 kilowatt hour battery on the older MX. And that is, once again, an increase in battery capacity without any dramatic increase in weight, which is pretty cool to see.
Yeah, even more impressive that they only added 4 pounds to the bike when you consider the increase in battery size they went with. A couple more things on charging and the battery. The charger is actually integrated to the stand, so being a street legal bike, it does have a side stand, traditional kickstand you can plop it on over on, but you have a center stand too that you could use in your garage, and the charger kind of nests inside there. So makes it a nice, neat little package. And also, according to Stark, the battery is projected to last 10 times longer than a 450cc gas engine. And when the battery does go, a battery replacement should cost about the same as an engine rebuild on a 450.
Yeah, which would be pretty interesting to see. And, it's something that we've seen comments about a lot, not only on the electric motorcycle side of things, but on the automotive side, which Alex and I also work on here at TFL. And there's a lot of people that are always very concerned about battery longevity from all the testing that we've done and what we've seen with the many, many consumers, actual owners that interact with us and tell us about their ownership experience with electric vehicles. Typically, battery degradation is not that bad. It's not as dramatic as some people make it out to be. So it would be really cool if it does, in fact, last 10x longer than a gas engine as far as how long it can go without needing a rebuild. But, it remains to be seen. We'll have to keep up with these bikes and see how that goes over time.
Yeah, for sure. We'll talk about one of these Hondas in a little bit, but we tested the 450 RL a couple years ago, and it was a great bike, but the maintenance schedules is what scared both of us off of it. So, having something that should be much less maintenance and much easier to live with and own than a traditional gas four-stroke that, needs all kinds of engine work all the time if you really use it, this should be pretty cool.
Something else that we like a lot on this bike is when you're going through and configuring one, not only can you pick your power output, your maximum power output, but you can also spec the suspension on this bike for your weight. So they've got 3 different options: soft, medium, and hard. The soft suspension they recommend for riders between 140 and 165 pounds, medium for 165 to 200 pounds, and the hard suspension for people that are around 200 to 225 pounds. That's a pretty nice thing to see as far as speccing the bike to fit you as a rider.
Yeah, I love that. I am a super light rider. Pretty much every motorcycle I get on is not soft enough for me. I always, even if it's a bike that's known to be pretty soft in the way it rides, it's usually too stiff for me just because of my weight. I'm always having to tinker with it. I'm always having to research and buy new suspension for different bikes. So the fact that you can spec it to your weight right from the factory, that's really cool. That gets me excited.
They also give you a pretty broad range of different off-road tires that you can choose from different brands, but they are all off-road tires that you're speccing there on Stark's website at the moment. So I'm sure once people are getting their hands on these and riding them, probably a lot of people are going to switch over to street tires, do a supermoto kind of setup on this, which makes sense to me, especially with this power output. You're going to be able to realistically use more of that 60 or even 80 horsepower on pavement. So I think this will end up making for a great supermoto.
Yeah, and they're running an 18-inch rear and a 21-inch front tire, so you're going to need to do some wheel swaps if you want like that true 17-inch supermoto. I hope Stark comes out with a supermoto variant at some point, maybe a Stark Varg SM or something, because I think they're most of the way there. Like you said, 80 horsepower on the road in a bike that weighs 264 pounds. Sounds like a blast.
Yeah.
So that's what I would like to see down the line at some point. But I'm sure, like you said, we're going to see people making their own supermotos out of this for sure.
Now for suspension, we've got 48 millimeter KYB forks, 11.8 inches of travel, both front and rear. The shock in the rear is a KYB piggyback. They're fully adjustable, so some really nice components there as far as adjustability and good quality from KYB. We like KYB suspension. And then, like you mentioned, 18-inch rear wheel, 21-inch front wheel with a machined billet hub. So some pretty nice parts that are going onto these bikes, as it should be for the amount of money that they cost, which we'll talk about in a second.
Yeah, and it doesn't just stop with the suspension and the wheels and everything. Brembo brakes too, so not the craziest setup. It's still a single disc up front, but 260 millimeter disc with a dual piston caliper up front. 220 millimeter rear disc. And what's really cool is you have the option for lever-controlled, hand-controlled rear brake on the handlebar. They all ship with the foot brake because that's a DOT requirement, but Stark is saying that they're including the rear brake kit. So if you wanted to convert this over and add that rear brake, you could, which for everyone that wants to use this as like a little stunt supermoto sort of bike, which I've seen on YouTube, a lot of people are doing that, at least with the MX version, then that's a great option.
Yeah, definitely. And since there's no clutch lever there, there's a perfect spot for it.
Exactly.
So really cool option there. And then we got to talk about maybe the strangest thing about this bike is the fact that they use a thing they call the Arkenstone, which is basically a smartphone. Not basically, it is. It's an Android phone. That is the dash for this motorcycle.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting choice. I would assume, and I'm just making this up, but I would think that they're kind of licensing this phone from someone else, slapping their logo on it. I don't think they're building a smartphone from the ground up. Yeah,
probably not.
But, it's an interesting way to do things. I have some questions about like how it secures to the bike and how you make sure that phone doesn't get stolen off your bike when you leave it and park it. But definitely interesting. And smartphones have really good bright screens these days, so I'm sure it'll look good.
Now, one of the things that we want to do with this video, because again, this news has been out, but we wanted to cover those basics, is compare this to some of the combustion dirt bikes, street legal, that are out there. And one that we've tested in the past is a CRF 450 RL. Now, this is a $10,000 dirt bike that is street legal from Honda, so it's less expensive than this. We'll go ahead and mention the price on these Varg EXs is starting around $13,000, but if you want to get the more powerful version, that's going to be about $14,000, and you can spec it all the way up to $15,000 roundabout, depending on what options that you pick. So this is a very, very premium dirt bike. It's more expensive than the CRF 450 RL, but it's worth mentioning that this and that CRF 450 RL have about the same suspension travel. This CRF 450 RL is a cheaper entry price, but theoretically over time, this Varg could be less expensive due to fuel costs because charging is pretty cheap, especially for a tiny battery like that, and maintenance, which should be easier. The other thing is that this CRF 450 RL from Honda is 289 pounds, so it's heavier than this electric bike, around 38 horsepower, so less power.
Less than half the power.
Yeah, so this is a more premium option, at least up front, as far as your MSRP. But in a lot of ways, this bike is actually superior to some of its comparable gas-powered motorcycles. There's probably going to be a lot of people out there that don't want to hear that. Fair enough. But whether or not you want an electric dirt bike versus a gas-powered dirt bike, whether that's a 2-stroke or a 4-stroke, it's impressive nonetheless that some of these electric motorcycles are starting to get to the point where even on paper, they are competitive, if not better on paper, than their gas counterparts, which I don't feel like at least happened in the past, because a lot of existing electric motorcycles that have been around for a while have been quite a bit more expensive than their gas counterparts.
I totally agree with that. I mean, it's felt like for a while we've had kind of two categories of the electric motorcycle. You've had like your $5,000-ish bike that isn't really street legal, but it's really not allowed in like mountain bike parks, and they just didn't feel at home anywhere, but people were using them wherever they wanted. They were pretty affordable. And then on the other end, you had stuff like the Harley Livewire and the Zeros, which are legit motorcycles, but you're going to break the bank. You could buy, 3 gas-powered motorcycles that will outperform some of those electric bikes for the money.
Or like the cake bikes that we tested that were really, really cool and great off-road, but also very, very expensive and just didn't seem like a value proposition.
Right.
Whereas these are starting to actually look like a bit of a value proposition, potentially, if you factor the long term.
Yeah, there's still definitely, like we said, this is a premium option for sure. If you're looking for whether you're going to use it on the road or you're going to use it off-road and trail ride with it, no matter how you slice it, this is a premium motorcycle.
$15,000 for any motorcycle is a lot of money.
Yeah.
I also want to say a quick thanks to our friends Scott and the team over at Rider Justice. They've been supporting our channel for a long time. They're here, Colorado based, but anywhere across the country. If you need legal representation, either on 2 wheels or 4, make sure you call Scott first. Hopefully, we'll get a chance to get on one of these soon. It'll be interesting because 80 horsepower from a dirt bike, that's ridiculous. 80 horsepower in a bike that weighs well under 300 pounds is ridiculous.
Yeah. Definitely. There you go. There's the Stark Varg EX. Let us know if you have any experience with the MX version that's been out for a couple of years. Definitely curious to hear your thoughts on just where electric motorcycles are going in general. Thanks for watching. Check out alltfl.com. We'll catch you in the next video.